What's up guys, Noah Brewer here, back again with another video, and by high demand, since I did my last video, everybody wants me to make a video on how I analyze the CBO testing campaigns that I talked about in my last video. So I do want to say, if you haven't seen that before watching this, make sure that you go and watch that. I'll show the thumbnail on the screen right here, because if you haven't watched that, then you have no idea what I'm talking about. Essentially, I'm going to do you one better, and I'm not only going to talk about how to analyze it, but I'm also going to be talking about how to scale it moving forward. Actually, analyzing is pretty damn easy. If it works, follow this video. If it doesn't, turn it off and test again. Pretty simple. Give your test 2 to 3 days. Anyways, let's get right into the video. So before we get started, I want to go over some different rules that you can follow when you're testing with CBOs and also scaling with CBOs, mainly scaling with CBOs. So unlike our previous method, which by the way is still very much working very well, like there's a time and place to test with ABOs and there's also a time and place to test with CBOs. We're kind of flip-flopping both methods. I got some people in the comments of the last video saying like, oh, which method should I do? It really doesn't matter. There's pros and cons to each of them, which I'll be covering in this video, why you would want to test with CBO in the first place. But the rules are a little bit different. So with our normal method, when you're analyzing and you're in the first like week, 2 week stages, what you would do is turn off bad ad sets and add new ones. CBOs are completely different. I do not recommend adding new ad sets into a CBO at all. That's pretty much destined to make the CBO fail. Same thing goes for turning off ad sets. There is a slight little exception when it comes to turning off ad sets in CBOs. Let me lay out the situation for you. So let's say you have a CBO that is profitable on lifetime, it's doing really well, but there's one ad set where it's spending the most money and that ad set is just terrible. Like let's say all the other ad sets have spent $5 to $15, and then you have this one ad set that has no sales at all that has spent $50. This doesn't happen very often, but if it does, this might be a situation where it's okay to turn off an ad set. But like I said, it's a pretty rare occurrence, shouldn't happen that much, but when it does, you might be able to make an exception. Another rule, especially when scaling, is do not edit the budgets of your CBOs. It's very, very tempting to just want to ramp something up just by editing the budgets. It's not really how I do things, and I've talked about this thousands of times before with students and in previous YouTube videos why I don't scale budgets. It comes down to not changing something that's working. If it's working, duplicate it and then increase the budget. That's the way that I do things. Another thing that was a pretty popular concern was, in terms of analyzing your scaling CBO campaigns or even your testing CBO campaigns, one of the things that people mentioned was, oh, like one day it'll suck and then the next day it'll do really good and then it'll suck again. That's usually how CBOs work. I noticed this from like the very first few CBOs that I ever tested last year, like early last year, where CBOs are very, very inconsistent, and that is perfectly normal. So like, let's say one day you have 0 sales on the CBO and the next day you have 10, and then 0, 10, 0, 10. And if that pattern repeats, you need to look at it averaged out over at least 7 days. For bigger accounts, you can even do more than 7 days, but I'd say 7 days is a good place to start. So the way that would average out is 5 sales per day. So if you're having one day with 0 sales and the next day you have 10 sales, you need to figure out, is it worth it to continue running it? Some days are going to be good, some days are going to be bad, but they should average out to be profitable. So let's get into the reasons why I started investigating testing with CBOs as opposed to ABOs, because there's nothing wrong with the ABO strategy. I know that for one, I'll call it out. I'll call out the elephant in the room. Testing with CBOs does not make much sense. Like when you look at the fundamentals of what a CBO is, it's essentially made to optimize your spend to the ad sets that are performing the best. And if you're testing products, it's not going to know which ad sets are the best. And another thing is sometimes they don't even optimize good. Like we talked about earlier, sometimes it'll spend more money on the worst ad sets, which is just a weird thing that happens. It shouldn't happen, but it does due to buying cues and different indicators that Facebook looks at to try and get you results. But I replied to all the comments in my last video and said that the biggest reason that we even explored testing with CBOs in the first place When you test with ABOs and scale with CBOs, that was my previous method, and it works really, really good. But the downside is sometimes when you make the transition from the ABO and you go into the CBO, sometimes you lose winning ad sets. Like, it's a weird transition. It's a little bit risky. It's just not, sometimes the ad account just isn't very comfortable with it. So what testing with CBO does is it actually gets rid of that transition entirely. Essentially, if you're starting with CBOs, it's a lot easier to scale with CBOs because it's pretty much as simple as, pulling an ad set, putting it into a new campaign with a higher budget. So that's the main reason that we do it. And, there is a discrepancy between how ad sets perform in an ABO versus in a CBO. Some ad sets would do really, really well in the ABO, and then we would put it in a CBO and it just wouldn't perform at all. And same thing vice versa. I don't know why this happened, but these are just problems that were running through my mind and my team's mind, and testing with CBOs seemed like a pretty viable option to solve these issues. Essentially, CBOs are really, really good for scaling. They're not the best for testing. I think ABOs are still by far the best for testing, but getting rid of that transitional period from ABO to CBO makes scaling super, super easy. If you can get a CBO test campaign to work on a brand new product, it's just very much easier to scale it, because the test campaign is literally already structured to be scaled. It's pretty simple. So like I said earlier, analyzing your CBO test campaigns is literally as easy as the last method. Let it run for 2 to 3 days. If it's profitable, good. If it's not profitable, or if it's losing money, maybe even if it's breaking even, but you could leave it on for a little bit longer than 3 days if it's breaking even, then you're going to want to just turn it off and test another product. If it is profitable, let it run up until the point where the campaign is hitting like 10 to 15 sales, or 10 to 20 sales, I should say, which is a little bit better. You essentially just want, a good foundation, good amount of sales coming in before you make the mess move. So once you do hit that 10 to 20 sales point, I'd say 15 sales is a safe number to wait for. There's basically 2 directions that you can go in. So you can make a relaunch campaign, which is essentially scaling horizontally. Or you can take your top ad set in your original test campaign, duplicate it 5 times into a $50 per day CBO. These 2 directions obviously have pros and cons, which I will explain now. So direction 1, creating a relaunch campaign. This is really great, and this is probably my favorite direction that you should go in here. The relaunch is so good because, for one, it allows you to get more winning ad sets to scale off of. Once you do make the transition into your CBO scale campaigns, essentially you have a bigger foundation, like wider concrete, so that you can build more walls up. I would recommend going direction 1, the relaunch campaign, if you either don't have a single ad set that's crushing it, like if they're all doing okay, but none of them are really popping out or doing really good. Essentially, if you don't feel ready to scale in a single ad set yet, or if you just want more ad sets to scale off of. It does pay off to be a little bit more patient in the beginning stages and build a really, really solid foundation. That way, when you do start transitioning into scale campaigns, you have a lot more to build off of. Another thing to note is if you do a relaunch campaign, it may open the opportunity for you to do a top 5 CBO as opposed to a 5X CBO. Which, a top 5 CBO, in my experience, has just performed a hell of a lot better and more consistently than 5X CBOs. Even though 5X CBOs still do work, and most of the time with this method, we are actually scaling with 5X CBOs. If you're doing relaunch campaigns and scaling horizontally first, you may actually be able to pull off a top 5 CBO. If all you're doing is an original test campaign with only 7 ad sets, you're probably not going to get a top 5 out of that. So direction 2, taking your top ad set and duplicating it 5 times into a $50 per day CBO. This is probably a great thing to do if you have an ad set that is absolutely slapping and you are ready to just scale it. A good example would be if you have a single ad set with 6 sales with like a 5 or 6 ROAS. What's a good ROAS is going to vary depending on your margin. But if it's a really good ad set and you just want to pop it and see if it will scale, this is a great thing for you to do. I do believe that relaunch is probably the best way for you to go. But we have done this in the past where we just go straight for the $50 per day 5x CBO, and it has worked really, really well. And one of the upsides to this method is if you can come out the gate and make a 5x CBO this early on, you could scale pretty quickly, considering that once you get that scale CBO campaign working, it's very easy to just ramp it up. Now, the downside to doing this is if your 5x CBO doesn't work, you may have a few ad sets that you can try it with, so you may be able to try like 2 to 3 of these. If they don't work, you're going to have to go back in time and do a relaunch campaign anyways. So if you delay building your foundation, and if your foundation is not strong enough to scale off of, your ad account will literally tell you like, hey, we're not ready to scale, and you'll have to go back and do a relaunch campaign either way, just to get more winning ad sets. So I do want to say, no matter which direction you go, the end campaign or the end campaign goal is going to be the same. At the end of the day, you want a profitable CBO scale campaign, so 50 a day, 100 per day, one of those, that you can go ahead and duplicate and double so that you can start pushing more money into these campaigns. So I'm showing on the screen what an ideal scale would look like. Essentially, you have your test campaign, wait until you have 15 sales. Bang out your relaunch campaign, wait until you have your ad sets that are having 5 or more sales with a good ROAS. Make your 5x CBO test, probably at 50 per day. And then if that works, all you got to do is just duplicate that 50 and make it 100. It's really that simple. And yes, you can modify this. Like you can go test campaign, 5x CBO, and then if that works, you can just start doubling. You can skip the relaunch aspect, but I don't 100% recommend it because like I said, if your 5x CBO doesn't work, you're going to have to go back and test a relaunch anyways. So I recommend just doing the relaunch in the first place. You can also do like test campaign, relaunch, 5x CBO, 5x CBO scale, and then maybe your 2 original campaigns are doing good and you can pull a top 5. So now you can start scaling with top 5s. There's a lot of different directions that you can go with, with this little ideal scale chart. It's not perfect, and you should be able to look at your ad account and analyze things and try to figure out what the next best move is in your ad account. At the end of the day, with Facebook ads, that's what your goal should be, is always trying to figure out what the next best move is to make you successful. So finally, I just want to say that scaling with CBOs, once you reach your CBO scale campaigns, is pretty straightforward. It's very similar to my other method where, every 7 days, you're just going to go in, duplicate it, and double the budget. So you make your CBO scale campaign, wait 7 days. If it's profitable, duplicate it, double the budget, and then just repeat that process over and over. And ideally, you have multiple CBOs running that you can do this with. Like I wouldn't really recommend taking one CBO to 10K a day. I don't know how long that would take, but probably not very long if you're doubling every single day. I recommend build your solid foundation so that you have a bunch of different ad sets that you can move into CBOs to scale with, and diversify your account so that sales are consistent. And if you follow the CBO testing method, you find a winner, you come here, you follow this method, and you want help, feel free to DM me on Instagram, and I'll see what I can do to help. But this method is pretty straightforward, and I had it on high demand, so I had to bang it out quickly. But yeah, I hope this helps. If you have any input or anything that you think could help me or other viewers, please leave it down below. As you know, I appreciate comments very much. I love your guys' support, and you're motivating me to upload on YouTube even more and share what me and my team are doing with our clients, because we have a shitload of clients and we know more about Facebook ads than we know what to talk about. So your video requests actually help a lot as well. So if you could request me some videos to make, I'd love to talk more about Facebook ads and what we do. The video on gem pages is coming soon. We're still working on some things with that, so that's why I haven't been able to make it yet. But it is coming soon, so for those of you who want it, it's coming. But yeah, this is Noah Brewer, and I'm out. Peace.